Yes, the tale of poor little Zek, the hapless human who somehow found himself in the hallowed halls of our prestigious alien academy. Bless his heart, the little meat sack never had a chance against the intellectual might of us superior Xenos. Let me set the scene for you, dear reader. Picture, if you will, our heroine, the ever-radiant Xyla, gliding gracefully through the corridors, her lustrous carapace gleaming in the fluorescent lights. She's the picture of poise and elegance, a true paragon of our species. And then there's Zek, scurrying along in her wake, his squishy little body barely able to keep up. Hey Zek, careful you don't trip over those oversized feet of yours. Xyla would coo, her voice dripping with false concern. Wouldn't want that fragile human frame of yours to break, now would we? The poor fool would just duck his head and mutter something unintelligible under his breath. Honestly, the way these humans communicate is simply barbaric. All those grunts and growls. How they've managed to survive this long is beyond me, but I digress. You see, Xyla had quite the reputation as the Academy's resident snob. She looked down on the humans with a mix of disdain and amusement, convinced of her own superiority. And Zeke, well, he was the perfect target for her condescending barbs. Ooh, look, class. Zeke's actually using a writing utensil correctly today. Aren't you just full of surprises? Xyla would simper, eliciting snickers from our classmates. The boy would flush a rather unbecoming shade of red, his face scrunching up in what I can only assume was an attempt at a threatening expression, as if a human could ever pose a challenge to an elegant, refined being like myself. But then something happened that gave Xyla pause. It was during a particularly grueling group project, the kind where we're forced to work with these humans. You can imagine Xyla's horror when Zek not only kept up with the rest of us, but actually managed to contribute some genuinely insightful ideas. I'll never forget the look on her face as she watched him effortlessly navigate the complex algorithms and theorems we were tackling. Her mandibles practically hung open in shock, her compound eyes blinking rapidly. How, she stammered, utterly perplexed. How did you? Zeke just gave her a small, infuriating smile and continued working, leaving Xyla to stew in her own befuddlement. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. For the human, a rare victory in the face of Xyla's constant barrage of abuse. From that day on, Xyla found herself unsettled. Her carefully constructed worldview, wherein humans were little more than bumbling, primitive creatures, had been shaken to its core, and she just couldn't let it go. There's no way a lowly human could have come up with that. She would mutter to herself, poring over Zek's work with a scrutinizing eye. He must have cheated somehow. There has to be an explanation for this. Little did she know, the explanation was far more extraordinary than she could have ever imagined. Part 2. Discovering Zek's secret 5,000 words. Xyla's obsession with unraveling the mystery that was Zek grew to new heights. She found herself constantly watching him, scrutinizing his every move, searching for any clue that might reveal the truth. There's just no way a human could be that intelligent. She would grumble to herself, her brow furrowed in concentration. It doesn't add up. There has to be something more to him. And so Xyla embarked on a quest to uncover Zek's darkest secrets. She combed through the Academy's records, poring over every scrap of information she could find on the human. But alas, there was nothing out of the ordinary. Just the standard data on his enrollment, his academic performance, and his worryingly unremarkable extracurricular activities. Ugh, this is getting me nowhere. Xyla growled in frustration, slamming her fist down on the data terminal. There has to be something more to this human, something he's hiding. It was then that a thought struck her. What if Zek wasn't actually a human at all? What if he was some sort of imposter masquerading as one of these pitiful creatures in order to infiltrate the Academy? Oh, the very idea sent a delicious shiver down Xyla's exoskeleton. Emboldened by this new theory, she redoubled her efforts, scouring every nook and cranny of the Academy's archives. And that's when she stumbled upon it. A single, innocuous-looking file that would upend her world forever. No, it can't be. Xyla breathed, her mandibles quivering as she read the information contained within. Zek is an alien? The revelations were staggering. Buried deep within the Academy's records was a classified dossier on Zek's true identity, a member of a highly advanced alien civilization that had been in contact with humans for decades. Somehow this unassuming human had managed to infiltrate their ranks, blending in seamlessly with his primitive people. Xyla's mind reeled as she pieced together the implications. All this time, she had been mercilessly mocking and belittling a being far beyond her own comprehension. This human, no, this alien Xyla had been playing them all for fools, hiding his true nature behind a veil of childlike innocence and bumbling incompetence. Impossible, Xyla whispered, her claws trembling as she reread the file. How could I have been so blind? Suddenly, it all made sense. Zeke's effortless grasp of complex concepts, his uncanny problem-solving skills, even his ability to keep up with the rigorous demands of the Academy. This was no mere human, but a being of incredible intellect and technological prowess, masquerading as one of the very species he had once looked down upon. Xyla felt a surge of emotions, disbelief, embarrassment, even a twinge of grudging admiration. How could she have been so arrogant, so foolish, as to dismiss Zek's abilities simply because of his outward appearance? For she, the paragon of their species, had been outwitted by a mere human, or so she thought. With a newfound sense of trepidation, Xyla began to re-examine her interactions with Zeke, searching for any other clues that might have betrayed his true nature. And as she did, a horrifying realization dawned on her. In her quest to humiliate and belittle him, she had only served to fuel his deception, validating his carefully crafted facade of weakness and incompetence. "Oh, Xyla, you fool," she muttered, her mandibles clicking together in a self-deprecating gesture. "You've played right into his hands, haven't you?" The weight of her actions, the endless jeers, the patronizing remarks, the relentless undermining of Zek's abilities, all of it came crashing down on her. Xyla had unwittingly become an unwitting accomplice in Zeke's elaborate ruse, her own prejudices blinding her to the truth. And now, as she stood on the precipice of this revelation, Xyla found herself faced with a choice. Would she expose Zeke's secret and risk the wrath of the Academy, or would she keep his true nature concealed? Out of a twisted sense of pride and a desire to preserve her own reputation, the decision, it seemed, was not hers to make. For in that moment, Zeke himself stepped into the room, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "So, Xyla," he said, his voice dripping with a familiar condescension, "I hear you've been poking around in my business." Part 3. Reversal of roles, 5,000 words. Xyla felt her entire exoskeleton stiffen as Zeke's words reached her auditory receptors. She had been caught, her carefully orchestrated investigation laid bare before the very subject of her obsession. "ZOZZ," she stammered, her mandibles clicking together in a nervous gesture. I can explain." The human. "No," the alien L simply raised a hand, silencing her with a casual wave. "Save it, Xyla," he said, his tone laced with a hint of amusement. "I already know what you've discovered." Xyla felt a surge of panic rise within her. This was not how it was supposed to go. She had spent countless hours poring over the evidence, meticulously piecing together the puzzle of Zek's true identity. And now, just like that, her grand unveiling had been snatched from her grasp. How did you know?" She managed to stammer out, her composure crumbling. Zek's lips curled into a wry smile, his eyes gleaming with a knowing intelligence that belied his youthful appearance. "Oh, Xyla, you really thought you could pull one over on me?" He chuckled, shaking his head in a decidedly human gesture. "I've been aware of your little investigation for some time now." Xyla felt her mandibles clench in mortification. Of course he had known. How could she have been so naive? This was no mere human, but a being of incredible cunning and foresight. She had been played for a fool, her own arrogance and prejudices used against. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Why did you?" She trailed off, unable to find the words to express the swirling maelstrom of emotions within her. Zek's expression softened, a hint of empathy creeping into his features. "Why did I hide my true nature?" He finished for her, his tone surprisingly gentle. "Well, Xyla, let's just say I've had experience with how your kind tends to treat those they deem inferior." Xyla felt a pang of shame course through her, remembering her own endless barrage of jeers and insults. How many times had she mocked Zeke, dismissed him as nothing more than a bumbling, primitive creature? And all the while, he had been hiding a secret that would have shattered her entire worldview. I'm sorry," she said, the words tumbling out in a rare moment of vulnerability. "I never knew. I never even considered that you might be." Zeke raised a hand, silencing her once more. "It's all right, Xyla," he said, his lips quirking into a wry smile. "I know you didn't mean any real harm. You were just acting according to your own biases, just as so many of your kind have done before." Xyla felt her mandibles click together in a sheepish gesture. How could she have been so blind? All this time, she had been so caught up in her own perceived superiority, so convinced of her own intellectual prowess, that she had failed to see the true depths of Zeke's abilities. "But why?" she asked, her voice tinged with a hint of desperation. "Why go to such lengths to hide who you are? Surely your own people would recognize your gifts." Zek's expression darkened, a shadow passing over his features. "You think I haven't tried?" He said, a bitter edge to his voice. I've been shunned, ridiculed, even by my own kind. They see my abilities as a threat, something to be contained and controlled. So I learned to blend in, to hide my true nature, just to survive. Xyla felt a pang of empathy, her mandibles clicking together in a sympathetic gesture. And here, I thought I had finally found a place where I could be accepted. Zeke continued, his gaze dropping to the floor. But then you came along, Xyla, and I couldn't risk it. Couldn't risk everything being taken away from me again. Xyla felt her heart, or the alien equivalent thereof, sink. She had been so caught up in her own petty grievances, so blinded by her own arrogance, that she had failed to see the true depth of Zek's struggles. This was no mere human, but a being who had known pain and rejection, who had fought to carve out a place for himself in a world that refused to understand him. Zeke, she began, her voice trembling with uncharacteristic emotion. I had no idea. I am so sorry. The human aerolized people looked up, his eyes meeting hers with a surprising warmth. It's all right, Xyla, he said, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. I know you didn't mean any real harm. You were just being you, I suppose. Xyla felt the tension in her body start to dissipate, a newfound sense of understanding blossoming within her. For the first time, she truly saw Zek, not as a weak, inferior human, but as a being of immense strength and resilience, who had weathered the storms of prejudice and discrimination to carve out a place for himself in this world. Zek, I don't know what to say, she admitted, her mandibles clicking together in a gesture of vulnerability. I've been such a fool, haven't I? Zeke chuckled, the sound surprisingly warm and genuine. Maybe a little, he said, his eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief. But hey, at least you figured it out in the end, right? Xyla felt a cautious smile tug at the corners of her mandibles. Somehow, in the midst of this topsy-turvy revelation, Zeke had managed to retain his good humor, his ability to see the lighter side of even the most dire situations. So, what now? She asked, the weight of their conversation settling heavily on her shoulders. What do we do? Zek's expression grew contemplative, his brow furrowing in thought. Well, Xyla, I suppose that's up to you, he said, his tone surprisingly measured. You hold the key to my secret now. Will you expose me, or will you keep it safe? Xyla felt a surge of conflicting emotions, the urge to reveal the truth, to shatter the facade that had been built up around Zek, warring with a growing sense of understanding and even admiration. This was no longer a human she was dealing with, but a being of immense complexity, who had faced challenges she could scarcely imagine. She began, her mandibles clicking together in a gesture of indecision. I don't know. Zeke nodded, his expression unreadable. Well then, Xyla, I suppose the choice is yours, he said, turning to leave. Just promise me one thing. Xyla looked up, her curiosity piqued. What is it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Zek paused, his hand resting on the doorframe. Promise me you'll keep an open mind, he said, his gaze meeting hers with a quiet intensity. There's so much more to this world, than you could ever imagine. With that, he was gone, leaving Xyla alone with her thoughts, her carefully constructed worldview shattered beyond repair. In the end, it was Xyla who emerged from that encounter a changed being, her arrogance and prejudices replaced by a newfound sense of wonder and humility. She'd learned that the true measure of a person or an alien, as the case may be, was not in their outward appearance, but in the depth of their character and the breadth of their experiences. And as she stepped out into the world, ready to embrace the infinite possibilities that awaited her, Xyla knew that she would never again underestimate the true potential of those she had once dismissed as inferior. For in Zek, she had found a kindred spirit, a being who had defied the limitations of his own kind and carved out a place for himself in a world that refused to understand him. And who knows? Perhaps in the end, it was Xyla who had the most to learn from this unexpected human, or alien, as the case may be.